Bellingham.
Hooray. Okay, Jason?
Hi, well, I'm a math teacher in Sacramento, a former congressional candidate, and a science fiction author, and considering a congressional run here in 2020.
Fantastic. Eray?
Hi there. My name is Eray Ozkural. I'm an AGI researcher. I'm currently based in Istanbul, and I'm the founder of a startup that automates data science using human-level AI.
Awesome. And Ben Zion?
Hi, I'm Johan Ben Zion. I'm the founder of the Arizona Transhumanist Party and chair of SED and presidential candidate for the Transhumanist Party and a devout and passionate advocate of greater e-services in government. Want to see that happen and hope participating in this talk can elevate that discussion ever so much.
Yeah, and thank you for doing this as part of your campaign, Ben Zion. All right, so algocracy is interesting because if you historically look at law, law is sort of a written form of rules that society then attempts to follow, and if they don't follow, they use the state, they use force in order to enforce those rules. It looks like that has been a sort of a common theme up until the 21st century. And now we have this thing called technology and computers, and it's slowly seeping into the consciousness and the mainframe of civil society. There's an increase in algorithm-based decision-making, and some people say it poses a threat to the political and legal system. The threat is in question is relatively unique due to its technological basis. It's difficult to resist and accommodate, say, some people because of the speed of change. Ben, I want you to open up on this one. What is algocracy? What do you define algocracy as? What is it for you conceptually?
Well, there's a lot of ways to approach this issue in early 21st century terms in talking about the kinds of e-services that I mentioned, in talking about greater e-governance and i-voting, the kinds of initiatives that are described in the Futurist New Deal for America, my platform for the Transhumanist Party. And then there's more speculative matters, which may be very soon at hand as well. Just moments ago, when I was talking to Eray on this subject, we mentioned the concept of the technocracy movement, the technate. This is a concept that dates back 100 years. And this is a similar set of initiatives, different kinds of approaches to the way that institutions are organized, efficiency metrics, engineering principles applied. As other forms of governance in the past have failed, despite their idealism because of the lack of man hours and resources that would be required to truly implement them, we can move this technate concept into the limelight as a form of governance. And I would say we mentioned this concept in passing with Kim and Steele and myself. The technate, we could refer to the algocracy equivalent, the algate perhaps. This form of governance, and so we have these very real prospects at hand, and the question is a question that we've repeated often on this show: are we going to use these things in the best way possible, or are they going to become orphan technologies that are not being fully utilized? I think of just 2 years ago, there was a presentation from Google Labs for the Google Assistant product. And this is a product which allows you to have your virtual assistant make phone calls on your behalf that are indistinguishable from other calls. And this kind of technology broadly allows for an incredible influx of man hours into the marketplace. And if we're going to have this in the marketplace, we should also consider having it in other areas, for example, in governance.
All right, thank you very much. I'm just going to do 2-minute opening statements here. Eray, what is algocracy? How do you define it? What does it mean to you?
Well, in my opinion, it should be considered as transparent processes that are somehow decided by the democratic body, but then automatically run things like say like the Department of Agriculture could run using AI technology. And say the Department of Forestry, while they could have armies of drones that will surveil the forests and say spot fires and respond and perform other routine maintenance tasks likewise. So this is supposedly going to lift a lot of burden off the shoulders of bureaucrats, right? So that's the general idea.
All right, thank you, Eray. Jason, what is the definition of algocracy, and what does it mean to you?
So it is in regards to algorithms making decisions. I think there is a big difference between those being administrative or being self-motivated. So seems to me is an extension of human decision making through the use of algorithmic tools, similar to being able to search a database, being able to search for what laws apply, not just what laws. So as this can be applied to we're looking at being able to remove a lot of discriminatory decision making or anything along those lines, in that it would level a playing field for everyone. I think it can create good and bad issues with that, but it's kind of like to government. The ability to use algorithmic tools is kind of like what a calculator is for an accountant, just to be able to get the big and be able to apply effective measures.
All right, thank you, Jason. And Daniel Hoyal, you're our constitutional lawyer. And will you have a job? That's my other question. But no, what is the definition of algocracy, and what does it mean to you?
I'm going to answer your joke question first. They've been talking about AI being the end of lawyers since I graduated from law school, and it's been nothing but giving us more work. So I'm not too worried about my security.
All right, that's
good. Well, it's not really great. I could use less lawyers, but for me, it's good. I think that it's like I said, governance by algorithm. It can mean a lot of different things depending on how big you're thinking, how many things you're going to turn it over to, and it raises some really interesting legal issues because our whole framework of law in the West is based on idea of due process and right of appeal, and what does that appeal mean, and how do you argue against an algorithm that has made a decision? Who do you go to after that? I think it raises some very, very interesting issues.
All right, thank you. So I actually grabbed a definition that I thought was suitable. And I said the term algocracy can be used to describe as decision-making systems in which computer-coded algorithms structure and constrain the way which human beings interact with those decision-making processes. This is from Agnesh 2009. Though algorithms has been around long before computers, though used to involve far more human input than they do every day. So that's the definition that I grabbed out of Agnesh 2009. So let's go back. Daniel, do you think that Lois, like Eray was saying, it's going to take some burden off of bureaucrats? Do you think that there is this ability to burden share, especially with lower courts? Things like speeding fines, drunken disorderly, things that don't really need to go up the chain very far because they're just sort of processes. Do you think there's a burden sharing ability there with algorithms?
Oh, there certainly is. And I'll tell you, algorithms have already infected all sorts of areas of law. I mean, if you get into a car accident, and you want to make a claim against your insurance in all likelihood is plugging in a bunch of different factors relating to your accident to determine what is a fair payout. These things already are happening. It's just privatized. You'll also, you are seeing some matter of automation happening in courts, but they're quite slow with it. I think in all likelihood, the first the first places you're going to see it being used in governance is going to be things like permits, construction permits, traffic tickets, sort of lower level, things where the stakes just aren't very high and where maybe a little bit of an accuracy is fine. I mean, on a societal level, if 1 out of every 10 parking tickets or traffic tickets is wrongly adjudicated, that's not going to be the end of the world. I think you get a lot more hairy when you start talking about more major cities and where people are actually hurt, that sort of thing.
Somebody has a loud noise coming through.
Is everything okay?
Somebody
it's
has
not me.
Yeah, I'm not anything.
Somebody does.
Okay.
Anyway,
Google is sabotaging our chat.
No, I think Google likes this chat. I think it likes this chat. Google wants more.
Google is evil.
So Jason, do you see burden sharing within within the algorithm world between courts and things like that? Burden sharing.
Yeah, I think that the ability to use technology to do a lot of is very apparent, not just with algorithms, but with physical things as well as which algorithms cover. So yeah, I think that the ability to not have a court decision boil down to who is paid more for a better lawyer, but to be able to view all the laws at the same time and have a non-discriminatory decision based on the current legal structure, that can happen through algorithms as opposed to who hired the right lawyer. And I think that's much more the spirit of law and justice than how it's translated through a capitalist system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I interject?
Yeah, go for it, Eray.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point because one very obvious advantage of using algorithms in governance is transparency. So we can supposedly check the inputs and outputs and the process of the algorithm. Anyone can check it, and this can be recorded. And so this would actually increase democratic accountability. It would help matters in that regard, but also to enable the kind of legal automation that you just talked about. You need artificial intelligence, so that can't be a simple algorithm. If you're actually going to review past legal cases, or of course you're going to need an AI that can understand language. So that's a lot of work, but it is ultimately doable.
All right.
Yeah, I agree. Meaning, like, if there is a consequence that could be, a range of different years or something like that a judge would put out from having an understanding of that person or the criminal's background and how to make the best person you can out of them, basically, would be something that a general AI may be able to accomplish.
Even sufficiently complex, sufficiently competent natural language processing system might be able to assist in that matter. Given time, of course, not the present systems, but let's say in the near future, the AI system might be able to do that, and also take into account so many court cases that are relevant to that case, and this comparative legal analysis is probably beyond the scope of many cases. There simply isn't sufficient time to do it, but with the algocracy, that suddenly becomes feasible. So that would be a major improvement, actually.
I want to push back just a little bit about, again, something somebody said about transparency. AIs, especially especially AIs that have been trained as they are now, not understandable often even by the people who rate them themselves, let alone the general public. So I think that's going to be a real challenge going forward, is to find a way to understand how these algorithms work, and also not just understand them in a technical sense, but if you can, people need to understand when they go in front of a court what is happening to them and why it is happening to them. And I think the computer said so is probably not going to be a very satisfying answer for people. Like, why is my kid going to jail for 20 years? Because the computer said so. Nobody wants to hear that. So I think it's going to be a real challenge for programmers to find a way to make these algorithms actually transparent. And I don't know how that's going to be done.
Well, sorry, I was the one who talked about transparency. So that's a real problem in deep learning, but there are solution methods. It's an open problem, basically. It's called explainable AI. So somehow you need some kind of transcript or some kind of explanation that the AI gives you. So it can tell you which steps it took or what it paid attention to, so people can check, right? So it will need that explainable AI technology here, but it's of course at a very low level of conceptualization. That legal system is going to require a lot more than just deep learning. So it's going to be a hugely complex system, the way you put it. But deep learning will probably play a role, especially if you'd like to analyze language.
All right, so that seems to be a natural gap. Okay, so there's going to be a rise of these algorithms from a different sets of data, different sets of forums, and these include big data, the Internet of Things, surveillance, data mining, and predictive analysis. Ben, you haven't spoken in a while. Big data, the Internet of Things, surveillance, data mining, and predictive analysis. Do you think that AI can do these things well?
Yes, I think that it can do all of these things quite well, and increasingly so. The kind of the predictive analysis thing in legal terms kind of probably sets some people's teeth on edge, Minority Report concerns. But by and large, I look at these concerns as the lower probability events. Daniel was speaking of a very real concern, but by and large, the failings of and speaking specifically of the legal side of things as opposed to the broader governance side of things, the failings of our legal system, like we haven't replaced the bail system or other kind of brutish institutions that are part of this, and that's partly this problem of not just having nearly enough man hours to do all of this stuff in a little bit more elegant way, and this kind of thing tends to solve that. These other concerns, I think of it a little bit in terms of the trolley problem with self-driving cars. It is disconcerting to imagine that an AI is making life or death decisions of this kind. But by and large, the net effect is that instead of having 35,000 deaths a year, if we have a full driverless system, we have a tiny fraction of that in the hundreds or something. And I'd imagine we would see a similar kind of a change in more user-friendly services and less sluggishness, and just being able to better do the job and do jobs that we hadn't even actually thought we could do because of these advanced algorithms.
Jason, you work with numbers. Do you see efficiencies coming from big data, the Internet of Things, surveillance, data mining, and predictive analysis?
Yes, and in that they're all digital, there is also the potential of fraud for most of those things. When it comes to what we accept that we could get from the computer, meaning like transcripts of existing laws, then it's not just because the computer said so, it's because the computer is citing the existing laws. And just so long as those can be cross-referenced, it should hold the equivalent voicing as whether it came from a person or not. And here in the United States, we have, determining whether a corporation can have the same rights as a person, which has been decided so and there's a lot of backlash against. So in that it's currently something where a corporation is able to represent as a person, why would a program not be able to represent as a lawyer if it's an incorporated thing? So currently we have what appears to be a legal structure where we'd be able to use those types of things as legal representation. Although that might change in the future as we determine what is a person and what rights they have in regards to the courts. But yeah, I think that as society is evolving along with all of these technologies, there are different layers of potential observation that could contribute to passively or as it kind of comes to a head in passive motion through court judgment in regards to the forming of society and how to best raise ourselves as humans.
Eray, you look like you want to jump in there.
Maybe, so that's the post-humanist loophole, right? The corporations have some rights. So supposedly, say, if my company succeeds in building a fully autonomous intelligent agent of sorts, and if we have a legal entity in the U.S., sort of like a person. So it would automatically assume some rights and could even engage in some business, even legal business. So this loophole currently allows a legal firm to use AI to do some legal work.
That's absolutely true. Yeah. That's like I said, every big insurance company is already doing that. They have, they don't. The computer doesn't actually, communicate what it comes up with, but the adjuster in certain cases will be disciplined or is risking discipline if they don't follow the recommendations of the AI. So in fact, the AI already is in charge.
Yeah, and
that's curious, right?
I think that similarly to insurance, as you're describing, I think that might be an actual foot in the door for effective transformation of the U.S. healthcare system, where you could require an AI attribute for as a piece of a medical malpractice insurance, which you need to have as an operating doctor. So if you get the insurance, then it comes with an AI attribute that would be informing the doctor of the outcome percentages, successful outcome, not successful outcome for whatever medical procedure they're going to do for a patient. And in that way, we can start looking at, we could hold accountable curative or not curative treatments, essentially, and not have doctors that are keeping people sick for money, kind of, or not actually curing the real things, because the statistics would be shown at the decision of whatever treatment.
AI could also be very good at inspecting things. So inspecting records that humans usually don't bother inspecting, right? So it could well be an effective tool in detecting past frauds from documentation.
Yeah, this is a good point. It can go through precedent law like that, and pick up precedents that old-fashioned filing and or old-fashioned computer filing even might not pick up, or exactly, or old-fashioned frauds. The investigative part of being a lawyer, I guess, or an investigator in the legal scene might diminish. Hey, does anyone else have anything else to say about big data, Internet of Things surveillance, data mating, and predictive analysis being the groundwork of the algocracy, efficiencies, deficiencies? Anyone else want to jump in and say anything about this? Otherwise, I want to move on to another topic.
I do.
Yeah.
So there are obviously privacy concerns there. So as you know, people are very worried that Facebook has been stealing all of our data. So we actually don't know how far this has gone. And we don't know if the U.S. government is actually using that data or not either, right? So that's actually a present crisis, and any technate or algocracy would have to address it. My preferred solution to that is using decentralization cryptography technology. Of course, there will be other approaches, but I suppose I just wanted to set the tone for a future discussion. Yeah.
I think that privacy is a gigantic issue, and I'm not sure to what extent a technical solution is going to be feasible when that comes down to that. The Free Software Foundation with Richard Stallman at the head had some really interesting things to say about this, and his take on it is, he's an absolutist. He thinks the only way to keep people private is you have to simply ban the collection of the data. At any time, as soon as you put the data in somebody's hands as a private individual, it is going to be abused. I think that my take is, I think it's a little more too useful to just give up like that. But there is something to be said for who's going to control the data. Right now, Facebook has all of our data and it sits in Facebook servers, and the U.S. government almost certainly accesses it. But we as individuals have no control over it, no ownership of it, and you can't. There's no legal action you can take in the United States to make Facebook erase your data. There is in Europe, interestingly. So it is possible to do it, but in the United States we can't do that. So it's going to require, I think, a very, very clever legal framework, and I think just leaving it unregulated is going to create these private organizations are going to become incredibly powerful as you get more and more data. At some point, Facebook is going to be able to blackmail anybody in the United States and anybody in the world, and that's a problem. So we should get ahead of that one.
Yeah, we know. Yeah, Facebook and Twitter and all of these open platforms are basically the largest open source intelligence operation ever, regardless of whether they were intended to be or not. And it's kind of interesting the amount of data they have on people. I mean, we know from Prism, we know from WikiLeaks, we know from a whole bunch of these guys that that there is a misuse of data going on there, and it goes right up to political campaigning and political elections, regardless of what side of the Trump-Hillary fence you sit on. There's Russian bots or there's not. I mean, it's one or the other, right? So, so we'll shift gears and let's talk about what is the threat of an algocracy. Okay, and even in a primitive stage of algocracy like we're in, where there's commercial applications to algocracy, where basically you walk into McDonald's and you're being algorithmically pushed through a system of food, or or broader threats when algocracy starts eating its way into civil society. What is the threat of algocracy, Ben?
Yeah. Well, there's a meme that says, the real problem with communism is that eventually the CIA comes and overthrows you, and the people are always talking about the problems with communism, but some of it is institutional backlash of a very, very large kind, and that's a very real risk with something like this, law of unintended consequences kind of stuff. These institutions in the U.S. have, you mentioned the kind of the two-party system having a great deal of power. People in the loop there not wanting to give up that power, and anything that would tend to distribute that more evenly is going to be met with some resistance. Those kind of people will unleash a certain level of chaos, maybe not utter chaos, but they're pretty comfortable with a certain degree of chaos in defense of their power base. So that, to my mind, that's the biggest risk of something like that. I think that's a near-term concern in the way that maybe some of these are near-term concerns. I should hope that systems that are able to make use of such sophisticated algorithms would be able to also see that everyone has their needs met
Eray, what is the threat of algocracy?
At the risk of sounding like the disciple of Noam Chomsky, I would say technofascism. We're already at some stage of technofascism, so we actually have to understand what's happening to be able to avoid even worse forms of technofascism in the future. And so who watches the Watchmen? That's the basic problem with any kind of any variation of technocracy, right? The same problem is actually persists in the Venus Project, the technate, the algocracy, any variation of the same idea. So in all of these ideas, there is usually a special group of people who decides the systems in technical details, the techno priests of the system. So that's very dangerous. You're creating something like the party in Soviet Union, right? And that's kind of dangerous. Therefore, I think the problem is, are we creating the technology that gives people more liberty or less liberty? So I'm also going to sound a little like Richard Stallman, but that's the basic issue, the liberty.
Jason,
Yeah.
what is the threat of algocracy?
For reactionary software to immobilize a society or government function.
That's your answer?
Yeah. To be able to be falsely judged, to be able to, some of the things that could go wrong anyway, are to identity theft somebody and commit a bunch of crimes so that there are algorithms going after someone else. The potential of hacking it is essentially the problem. And yeah, technofascism as a term, I think having being ruled by a game that you can figure out rather than
the problem of if we get to a point where total surveillance can be implemented and not just putting up cameras everywhere, right? We can already do that, but the problem is nobody can sort through it. If you have a government that has cameras in every place, then everything that is done is tracked very closely. Then everything can be controlled, and it's going to be very difficult to fight against that once if we get to that world. In the short term, you asked a question about. You said, how is this going to affect our democracy? And I'm going to say it already is in very profound ways, in that free speech and the speech that gets heard is a function of democracy. There's no democracy without free expression, free speech, and without your videos and audio and words getting out to an audience. Who sees this video, whether or not YouTube promotes it, is an algorithm. It's an algorithm that Google has happened to tune to make them the most money. And right now, the speech that goes to the top is the speech that makes Facebook or Google the most money. Facebook has figured out that if you only show people political opinions they agree with, whatever those political opinions happen to be, that more people will stay on Facebook longer and it makes them more money. Well, that is, weird, probably not ideal, maybe not dangerous, maybe it is. It could get a lot more dangerous depending on who's in control of those algorithms and what they want. And it already is now to a certain degree. I mean, if you watch a couple of Jordan Peterson videos on YouTube, you might start getting recommendations for actual white supremacist fascists. I don't think Jordan Peterson is one at all, but there is apparently an overlap in audience, and the algorithm, again, only intending to increase profit, also is, maybe giving some pretty bad ideas to some pretty impressionable young men who just need to be told to clean the room. So I think the danger's already here, and we need to, as a society, democratically figure out what we're going to do about it. And there are different solutions. Decentralization is probably a wonderful one. Getting things off of just one or two platforms would help. But beyond that, that's for you guys to figure out.
I like that answer a lot. It covers a lot of different threats, and these mind threats, where people get logged into these algorithmic loops of, and it's just something that always happens to me. I like one thing, and then bang, I get flooded with the same thing, and it starts to change your perception of the world. And you have to be really, really careful about what algorithmic input you have on your Facebook feed or something like that. So. That's a good threat, and that's a really legitimate idea. This sort of lone wolf radicalization done through algorithms. It's a really interesting idea. I got to hear that public decision-making processes ought to be legitimate. Most people take this to mean that the processes should satisfy a number of proceduralist and instrumentalist conditions. In other words, the processes should be fair and transparent, whilst at the same time achieving good outcomes. The problem with algorithmic systems is that they tend to favor good outcomes over transparency and fairness. This is the threat they pose to the political legitimacy. Because of their efficiency, I guess. See, Lady Justice is blind, right? Anyone want to expand on that?
Oh, well, that's a lot of unpacking, but if I might chime in, I think it's possible to make the system, well, maybe not the algorithms per se, but the system transparent and fair by imbuing the design with some principles of democracy, right? So it can't be just any system. It has to be designed from the ground up with respect to those principles. And that's going to be a great challenge. It's not going to just spontaneously form. You have to think hard about it. And that's why I recommended a decentralization approach, because a lot of the problems in applying technology to decision making will lie in simply not being able to make sense of what's going on, but also because, inherently, there will be the developer's bias in the system. So these principles that you mentioned of fairness and transparency have to be omnipresent during the entire development stage. At every stage of development, we need some democratic input to make sure that those principles are applied, so the system can reproduce them. And of course, the transparency thing. To make it transparent, the entire system should be open to the public, right? So if I recall correctly, Obama in U.S. Was very keen on transparency, so they made some improvements in that regard. While similarly, you have to make sure that all records are kept secure and untampered with and accessible, and then likewise with the contents of the decision-making processes, the public must be able to make sure that the algorithm does what it's supposed to do. This should be able to the public should be able to verify it independently, and these all sound like cryptographic problems to me. So there are some solutions to these in cryptography. So there are some technical solutions. say, such as homomorphic encryption that allows privacy of computation, but it allows the computation to be publicly verified. So even when private data is concerned, you can make sure that the algorithm runs correctly and is not tampered with. So you will need this cryptography protocol-based technology throughout the whole system. That's my prediction. And furthermore, we will also need to reproduce democratic systems within the technate, within the algocracy or whatever this is, right? So you will need to somehow make a democratic assembly. Eventually, we will need that. And it will have to run on technology, but that's not owned by a private company. And I think that's very important.
Is that just open source though? Is that all that is? It's just the open source network?
Well, an open source decentralized network would be ideal, right? But essentially, what really matters is that the public has ownership of this technology. The technology should not be controlled in any way by a corporate like, say, Boeing, right? Because we know what they will do with it.
Daniel, you know the law. Is that feasible in the United States, or is you know?
Sure, it's feasible. Actually, I don't see any problems with it, even under current law. You'd have to. It's a matter of having the political will to create the specialized administrators that would be able to design and build and keep it, basically run the open source community in a way that works, which is something that I would say government certainly doesn't know how to do that.
Because Eray, you're basically saying here that you want to turn open source in this algorithmic legal sense into a utility, right?
Well, yeah, but open source is one way to achieve the transparency of the code itself. So it's an essential concept here.
All right, and that would fit in with the futurist New Deal blockchain e-government's methods, right? That runs pretty close, doesn't it, Ben?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. And it does. And I think that also we're kind of moving into new conceptions and models here, like something at this stage being described as utility. If it has this access to resources and is operating in some sense to the public good, the extent to which it could be described as owned by whom is kind of an afterthought to my way of thinking. I think that people recognize the danger of not doing this. Even people, we talked about the level of creep of techno-fascism by the power of these corporate big data entities, Facebook and many, many others. Some of these people who are pretty comfortable being techno-fascist overlords in a certain sense, when they look at the prospect of algorithms that are effectively some kind of master key or something approaching or akin to a recursive self-improving algorithm, that when they look at that prospect, they see the hubris of not making that into something that a lot of eyes are on that and a lot of people are doing that. They don't want to make that their own property because they would be putting a huge bullseye on themselves. They would become global persona non grata. No matter how much power you have, if everyone hates you and wants to rip your guts out, that's effectively. So I mean, the main problem in my view then is not or a main problem is the taboos and the lack of technological literacy and the lack of political will to use these things well. Because I think that the sort of distribution of it and decentralization of it will happen as a matter of course as it is implemented. We need to be very careful, of course.
May I add something? Interject here, but well, you know, these are excellent ideas, all of it, but we've been talking about more or less innocent issues, right? Like say legal stuff, like did someone get a ticket from the traffic police or not? Stuff like that. These are innocent things, okay? Bad guys don't care about those things. Those are ordinary daily stuff, right? But now let's talk about the stuff that matters. As you know, currently USA Army is considering a plan that will give the control of nuclear weapons to an AI system. So that's, I suppose, the sort of thing that's really important, right? How about that?
Yeah, go for it. Jason, you haven't spoken in a while. What do you think about that? Would you trust, if you saw on the TV and President Trump said, we are no longer in control of the nukes, we've handed it over to an AI, what happens?
You get a movie like Terminator. Right? It's exactly the plot. With Skynet, but I don't think that would be a smart move at all. Currently, it's not even a single individual. Even if Trump hits the button, that doesn't mean something is launched. It requires more than one person turning a key simultaneously. It requires group, not just group decision-making or communication, but group action. For something like a nuclear weapon, that's not something that could ever be left in the hands of something that is a reactionary piece of software.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's feasible for responsible governance. And what we were touching on before in regards to basically being able to be open source and transparent, dealing with top secret information, protected information, such as proprietary information, intellectual property rights, and personal privacy. I think those are our major hurdles with being able to have something functional that can make sense in every instance that it's operating, without having to have large blackouts on sentences of reasoning why.
Daniel, jump in. You're ready to go.
Yes. Yeah. No. This nuclear thing reminded me of Stanislav Petrov, who is a Russian in 1983 who was running the desk that was the early warning system for the Soviet nuclear early warning system. The system reported to him that there was a massive launch of nuclear weapons, and he did not tell his supervisor. Because he thought that the code was new and buggy and he didn't trust it, because he did not, some people actually credit this man with saving the world. Look it up; it's really interesting. I think that if you're talking about anything of that sort of gravity, putting a automatic AI in charge of it is absolute madness. I understand the idea of, we want to, bind our hands so the Russians will never launch at us, because if they launch at us, we will automatically launch at them. But it's absolute madness to think that that's a good idea.
But
well, there's no scenario where I think where a super intelligence is actually like discerning and conscious. So it's really just a question of like, do we have a little bit better way to have oversight of these systems and still have people in the loop? I mean, I think we're kind of going to a scenario that is not entirely plausible. It plays into people's various just as the word AI plays into people's metaphysical notions about machines somehow being anthropomorphized. I think in reality, just what we're talking about is a system that is able to do to be like this Russian gentleman, a little more discerning, but still having humans in the loop, just decreasing the likelihood of making those kind of mistakes. But I mean, I'm not. I don't know.
I'm not so sure, Ben. There is military creep. I mean, you know, who in the 1980s would have thought? I mean, they've always wanted to automate the military. I mean, they were in the 1960s or something. They were trying to launch self-autonomous planes, you know, with fighter jets into the sky. I mean, they had these things going around. I mean, they tried to invent the bat bomb. Remember that? The bat bomb against Japan, where they strapped the bombs to the bats and let them fly. I mean, they've been trying to use automation through animals and automation through computers any way they can. And now they have drones that are pretty much automated. I mean, in a way, a self-flying drone stopped World War III because, you know, Iran shot it down. It was a $160 million drone. Trump said, well, you know, it's just a drone. You know, it sucks. It's an American asset. Costs a lot of money. But you know what? We're not going to invade Iran over a drone. In that way, the robots saved, you know, because if that had been a person in a fighter jet, I mean, that's a different scenario, right? So, but military creep in general, I mean, Eray jumped way to the top, but military creep in general is an absolute issue because when you go to the very bottom and you're talking about soldiers and units, you're talking about saving lives, you're talking about saving limbs, you're talking about saving healthcare costs, you're talking about saving training costs and all this sort of stuff. There's a massive incentive there, and it will creep its way up. I mean, Eray jump to the end of the scale, but I mean, what's the difference?
I should say that I'm on record many times as saying that the U.S. military industrial complex, as it exists today, should not exist. And that is the one thing that I think all of these many candidates in the U.S. Transhumanist Party primary do tend to agree on, that we need to find and implement as many ways as possible to reduce this Pentagon bloat, and also just reduce this imperialistic impulse. You know, that to some degree, I mean, such as the extent to which such a thing should exist, I suppose we have to make allowances for some kind of cyber war necessaries. That would be one thing, but that's. But a lot of these other, so the question of whether the U.S. In possession of an artificially intelligent singleton should be giving that singleton power over a nuclear weapon, I don't think those nuclear weapons should really be in the equation at that point. But
Daniel, you wanted to jump in after my rant. What happened?
No, I not necessarily. I just was thinking about the important thing here is that all critical infrastructure needs to be, you know, air-gapped and needs to be ultimately controlled by people with relationships, at least for the foreseeable future, because, you know, we know that, you know, we know people screw up all the time. We know that, for example, having algorithms in charge of cars is probably already safer than human. You know, as much as it freaks people out to think that you know, and as much as people don't want to be that 1 in 1, you know, 10,000 people who get into a AI car accident as opposed to 1 in 1,000 people who get a normal car accident, you know, that's probably better. But you definitely have to have, you know, the thing with software is that it fails. When it fails, it sometimes fails catastrophically. And anything that you want to that cannot fail catastrophically. A power grid, you know, a nuclear weapon, needs to ultimately have humans or a series of humans necessary for any sort of, you know, major change.
I agree.
Yeah. And I think, I think that, again, it comes down to a question of like, having this kind of resource at your disposal is a very good problem to have. There's no supervillain in, you know, from Scooby-Doo or something who's personally invested in human misery. human misery is a feature of imperfect supply chains and lack of resources and problems of this kind. So this is a problem that is solved by a fully automated society and an AI-run society. There's no reason that I would see for putting the brakes on this, but there is every reason, of course, to having all of these discussions and be talking to people who have insights into how this could actually be implemented, like Eray, as much as possible.
Yeah.
System advances.
We talked about the legal system, hospitals, and now I talked about the military, and now you're coming to the economy, right? So that's supposedly the biggest benefit of automation, because well, it's not because AI or algorithms are better at judgment, but it's because I think there's a lot of corruption whenever money is involved, right? Yeah, so I think, in my opinion, like a well-designed algorithm, think of your operating system. The reason it doesn't crash is because, computer scientists are smart enough to ensure some guarantees in there. So we might be able to build in the same kind of guarantees into whatever system we're dealing with when we're automating decision making, and that includes economy. It includes allocation of resources, supply chain, as you said, and that's actually the core idea in the TechNate, right? So supposedly, there is this control room which shows us all the supply, all the materials on a map, and the algorithms decide which resources are going where. It's this science fiction picture, but it's not actually possible today. This wasn't so feasible.
That's Walmart. Walmart is doing that today.
Yeah, right. You're absolutely right. Walmart and Amazon are actually capitalist realizations of communist dreams, right? In that sense.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I think that we have to we need to have democratic control, because these algorithms can be great, and I think Walmart and Amazon show that actually frankly, a communist firm can do anything they want, because there's no democracy there. There's no popular control, and it is really just like a top-down command and control can actually distribute goods across the whole world. But if you want to look at and the algorithm is key to that, and algorithms can be tremendously useful for distribution problems. But then you also have to look at other parts of the economy that's ruled by algorithms, like air travel, right? Your tickets, the price you pay for an air flight, which makes no sense. Or it makes some. It makes enough sense if you want to make sure that your airplanes can extract as much money as possible from the populace, and that's why the prices are the way they are. That's why some of these that's why it could cost, an airplane could be half full and taking off in 2 hours, and it's still $800 to travel 1,000 kilometers, because they figured out that on average they can get more money that way, not fill more seats, get more money. So I think you have to have algorithms, as algorithms take over more and more of the economy, we need to have those algorithms work for what we want the economy to look like and what we want the society to look like.
Jason?
Absolutely.
I think that's a very, very good point in regards to the motivation behind the algorithms, and which is basically how it's programmed to what effect, right? So if you go to business school, they teach you cost benefit analysis, and it's all geared towards money. That's very different than if you are going to like an environmental school, where you're not learning how to maximize profits on widgets, but you're learning how to stabilize an environment and a habitat, for example. So as we balance those those values in a system like capitalism, how do we still have the freedoms of capitalism, as free a market as we can possibly have, but not be subject to dysfunction, except for those who can afford whatever it is it might be. So, I mean, for the same thing where it's like, yeah, they're maximizing how much they could make out of a plane ticket, you can also now use a single website to view all the different websites to find the cheapest ticket for all the airlines. So it's a new beast in the jungle, and it has the real core of it is how it's being motivated and knowing where that motivation is coming from. But yeah, it can make things more profitable. It can also make things more accessible for competition.
It's a super interesting point that you're all touching on, because it feels like as we get closer to any type of singularity, I mean, we've already been through 2 or 3 singularities in history. Some of you lived through one of them, that being the agricultural, the agrarian, the information revolution, at least being 3 singularities already. It feels like everything is being pulled towards a central point, right? And that way, it's kind of interesting that we end up with a communist-style capitalist mode, like Walmart or Amazon or something like that, because it's all getting pulled towards this central point where time and space don't make sense anymore, and so the core of it is based on supply and demand, but that's about as far as it goes. Everything else is algorithmically on a logarithmically sort of written in. It's kind of super interesting that you guys are pointing that out. I like that a lot. Look, listen, we'll change up gears a little bit, but that's good. Thanks for bringing up the economy. So weapons, the economy, justice system. You can see how this algocracy is. Algorithms have already creeped into mainstream society, mainstream life, especially in the West and Japan and some other Northeast Asian countries. And and there's also in the background, there's no real initiative to slow it down. Governments, corporations, and everything are investing more money all the time to speed up the algorithmic processes. To, if you're in finance, to scrape out 0.1% of profit if you can get it. And in commercial, in retail land, to sell more products and reduce inefficiencies on your supply chain and all that. But is algocracy a threat, and could we resist it if we wanted to? Daniel, open up. Is algocracy a threat, especially speaking on your main theme, which is law? Is it a threat? Are we a threat? And if we are a threat, could somehow we resist it, or is it inevitable?
I mean, it's not inevitable. We could just turn off the electricity to everybody, and there's no more computers. But it's pretty much inevitable under our current, under our system. It's in the interests of those with power and money in the society to accelerate it, and you're going to see it continue to accelerate. Is it dangerous? Absolutely. There are people who are, luminaries in industry who say this is the #1 threat to humanity. I don't necessarily agree with that. But it's a huge deal. We've talked about some of the ways today that has been abused, has already been abused, and that we can try to regulate it. But it needs to be regulated. And I haven't sat down and came up with some sort of a plan to do it. I hope that maybe this is a good place for the Transhumanist Party to step in and come up with some platforms and some actual ideas to get into the mainstream and to start pushing for the right kind of regulation where we can, control it without losing some of its very real advantages.
Jason, is algocracy a threat, and could we resist it as a society or a globe if we wanted, or is it like meat? We're just going to keep on eating it, even though we know it's bad for us. You know, in many ways.
I think that it's a threat depending on who you are. If you're making money off of something that you shouldn't be, for example, like if you are a for-profit healthcare organization or a pharmaceutical company that is profiting from not healing someone, and an algorithm can make that something that is very clear to both the doctor and patient and legal system, then yeah, that's a threat to that organization, which is, due to corruption and things like that, could be very difficult to combat otherwise. So I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a threat to society, but I think it's a threat to specific business interests and things like that in specific cases. So there would be pushback and lobbying against some forms of algorithm implementation. It's also a threat to our privacy and other things along those lines. How it would go in translation to the Fourth Amendment, those types of things are to be determined. But in general, I think it's an evolution for society that is good, so long as we use this tool for good.
All right, thank you. Eray, you're on the development side. Is it a threat? And, is algocracy a threat? And could we resist it if we wanted to?
It can be a threat. It's not necessarily so. But if we design the system such that power and authority are centralized more than they are presently, then it becomes a huge threat, and we would find it very difficult to resist against that. It would basically be the dystopia of 1984.
All right. Thank you. Somebody's got their somebody mute their microphone. All right, thank you. That worked. All right, Ben.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Is algocracy a threat, and could society resist it if they wanted to?
Well, I don't know that we can resist this sort of thing. The kind of effort that would be required and the kind of destruction that would be unleashed in stopping the pace, or even slowing slightly the pace of techno progress, would be quite tremendous. But I think that the threat is really the things that we kind of touched upon in talking about what Walmart or Amazon is or is not. These are things that have siphoned off many millions of good jobs, and also in the course of doing so have automated a lot of systems that are of great interest, but basically siphoning resources to a select few people in doing so. And the idea of applying this to all sectors of society, this effect, I think the benefits are tremendous. The downside of not doing that is just more of the same. Automation does threaten 800 million existing jobs. We don't have really good answers for that. And because we have these so much fear-based thinking around these kinds of things, we're playing into the hands of these techno-fascists.
Does anyone have anything to add on the threat analysis? All right. Go. You're right. Sorry. Yep.
I think the development of solid-state hardware processing as a key to being able to determine the authenticity of the software running right is something that's going to enable enable this to not just be software, but to function as hardware in society for robotic workforces, self-driving cars that you would need to literally break into in order to hack through a hardware processor, not firmware, not software. When that is a more common way of doing things, it makes the ability for algorithms to be implemented upon hardware in a safe fashion. And I think that's one of our next steps in development.
All right, thank you. All right, so my final question that I had planned, I mean, you can go or say whatever you want after this, but is can humans and the algocracy, or hypothetical algocracy, could we live side by side? Could we coexist? Ben, start.
Wait, could you repeat the question?
Sure, no problem. So can society and an algocracy peacefully coexist, or is it doomed for failure?
Yeah, no, I don't see algocracy as something that's a threat to anyone if we approach it at the earliest stages with these AI safety and design principles in mind. I see it more as an overlay that would add a tremendous amount of providence and stability to civilization. At the same time, there are risks. We meant in this context, we sometimes use the analogy of the harnessing of fire by early modern humans. Fire is a double-edged kind of weapon. It can give you great food and warmth and safety. It can also burn you very, very badly. And when we're looking at things that have this amount of power, we're looking at something that can potentially is an existential risk, and we shouldn't downplay those concerns. But what we're doing by having this conversation to some small degree and is to be engineering to avoid those problems. And I think if we do that, our due diligence in that area, then we will have something that allows for a new golden age in humanity that has very little downside.
Thank you. Eray, can society and an algocracy live side by side, coexist peacefully?
Well, I think so, but there are, of course, many risks. I would like to mention the case of China. Just yesterday, I watched a video where a Chinese man approached the trash bin, and a trash bin recognizes his face, and the trash bin opens by itself, right? So they've already done some stuff there. So I suppose that's about how useful automation can be for local governance, right? So we're talking about municipalities. And if you imagine all the common tasks that a municipality has to accomplish to maintain the city or rural areas, I think these can be effectively aided by AI units. That's absolutely certain, and it will have great impact, by the way. It will ease matters a lot, and it will also be very cost-effective. So that's going to help a lot of people. But I think more problems arise at the national or global governance level, because then matters become complex, and then there are some dangerous decisions that can be made, such as with nuclear weapons, and there are, of course, larger risks. So I like to talk about a case. I still read people's opinions about this event that happened in 9/11, right? So people tend to forget it, but there was an investigation, right? People weren't satisfied with it, but it was closed. The investigation was closed nonetheless. So that's a typical case of human blunder. Who chose those people as investigators. How much control does the public have over that particular process, which is like really significant, because, we would like to find out, well, the public would better know if it was an ordinary terrorist attack, or were the Saudis behind it, etc., right? But the case just got shut down because apparently the U.S. government has that authority. It can just end things as it likes. So the bureaucrats have a lot of power over people at this national scale. And here, the choice of technology, algorithms, will be critical at this national decision-making scale, policy scale. It will be critical, and we can exist easily with this, municipality automated sewage system. But what about the algorithms that run the military or foreign relations or other critical government functions? That's really incredibly difficult to imagine.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. All right, so Jason, sorry, did you want to finish?
Well, just I don't think the relevance of this can be understated. What Eray has said, that these hyper-nationalist institutions and oligarchic institutions are the real threat to us today, and the real threat in this kind of future framework. There's an interesting kind of alternate history thought experiment wherein, if there had been an AI takeoff to some techno-singularitarian effects in a world that has 7 million people instead of 7 billion people, that we might have been able to better handle this kind of thing. And that's not some kind of Malthusian concern. It's just like an assessment of what nation states are and are not in the present day.
Jason, can civil society, and the algocracy coexist? Can they get along?
Yes, but it's also so long as the algocracy slowly develops, is patient, and learns humanity thoroughly before making effective decisions. For example, some people could be having some kinky sex with handcuffs. That doesn't mean it's rape. But if someone is handcuffed and raped, there's a big difference. So the ability to have algorithmic determination of those things that are very, very fine lines sometimes from a perspective of a computer, how do we make that happen? And I think it's going to take a lot of patience, not just on our part, but on the part of the algorithms that are getting to know humans in regards to what is culturally acceptable or socially acceptable, or what is okay where, and what is a human rights violation versus not. Those types of things, and what is sarcasm? How do you get that from logic?
Yeah, well, Robocop might shoot you because he doesn't get the joke, right?
Of course, a real cop might shoot you because he doesn't get the joke too. So I'm not sure how.
Yeah, I'm equally worried about that one. Those guys already exist.
But Jason, you're making a really good point here. In fact, and Eray is the other. You're the other side of that. Is who's writing the definitions? Who's inputting the data, and what is it learning? Anyway, Daniel, same question. Can the algocracy and society coexist peacefully? Can they?
So I feel like every question you've asked is needs a doctorate thesis to answer. I mean, these are
Yeah.
and barely very badly understood. I mean, I would say that the algocracy and civil society already coexist, and and you can see the effects of it. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. It's so easy to just sort of minimize the importance of things like the YouTube algorithm, or I listen to music. I use the Spotify, which is this great service for me, and it just so happens that it recommends songs that I love constantly that I've never heard. It's actually greatly enriched my life, right? YouTube has been the opposite, and I think that we need to. It's like I was trying to say, in order for their coexistence to continue to be a peaceful one, or to at least be acceptable, is that we need to be very upfront about how much these algorithms are already affecting every part of our lives. We need to demand control. We need to think about what we want those algorithms to optimize for. That's point number one. Point number two is that these algorithms can't get too integrated. Anybody who does CS knows that one of the most common forms of hacking is privilege escalation, right? Where you get into a system through a small way and then use that to get to a next, to get to the next, get to the next. Well, if you have systems that are collecting data from 100,000 different sources, that's 100,000 different attack vectors. Just as another illustration, not too long ago, somebody figured out that they could remotely turn off the engine, and I think it was a Jeep, but I'm not sure. I don't want to demean the brand, by using a radio transmitter to spoof the input from the tire pressure sensor.
Ha.
Okay, because it feeds into the system that controls everything else, and they could, and so even think about this municipality stuff. Well, that sewage treatment plant, that could be very, very good, or it could end up being that there's some data input point that could be used as an attack vector that could cause that system to reverse a pump and send raw sewage into the water supply. Right? These are actually deadly serious issues. So the second point is, I think is you need to have very clear barriers between systems that require human input or require human control. Because we don't want to, become into a system where bad actors and hackers can really, take control of, or really do damage, or sorry, just another example. Baltimore recently, their entire municipality was shut down because a hacker was able to. It was a Bitcoin encryption ransom racket, where they basically encrypted the entire city government system and shut this entire city down. It's just a city which doesn't have that much money to begin with, right? So we have to be super careful about that, and make sure we have not too much automation. Make sure these things stay compartmentalized and controlled.
So this is really important, Daniel, because what you're highlighting here is something that I wanted to bring up, which is there's not one AI. Okay, there's not just, because we're talking about the big fundamental AIs, but there's millions and billions of AIs, and they're at all different stages. They have all different functions. Some of them are very benign. Some of them are quite advanced. Some of them are, chatbots. Some of them are learning bots. Some of them are, used for mechanisms of finance or of business, of warfare. So they're all over the place, and it's kind of like herding cats in a way. It's kind of like trying to, getting a whole ant colony and cupping each one and saying, hey, I want to control every individual ant. It's almost impossible to do, because there's so many of them. They're for all different functions, and they have all different sort of abilities and capacities. And so that I think is why the conversation is so complex, and it's because we don't have some sort of AI in the modern system, which is kind of when you talk about nanobots, right? You talk about the grey goo theory. I think Ben, you would know about this, but you talk about grey goo, right? And there's an argument. Why don't you have police nanites? That you have the nanobots. Going back and forth to compartmentalized servers in a way. And if they don't interact with specific servers, they get hunted down by police nanobots, right? So algorithms, I think, would have to have their own police system, just like civil society has its own police system to enforce law, like constitutional law or local municipal law or something like that. You need some sort of algorithm, police algorithm. Eray, is that possible? Could we get some sort of police algorithm?
Yeah, we could.
And that's pretty much what Palantir does.
Well, we AI researchers all work for the police state, so we would know. Right. Well, first thing, what Daniel said, I think, if you have to interact with humans, it's true that the AI the system, algorithm or whatever system, would have to discern these, commonsensical things that are obvious to us, but not so obvious to us, to machines presently. So they would have to be intelligent, they would have to be AI units, and they would have to know about ethics, right? But so these units could also know about law and could police themselves to a certain extent. But there could also be other units that supervise and control, even judge such units, the correctness of their performance, or whether they carried out their instructions correctly, or whether they engaged in the correct sorts of interactions with humans. That is all possible in some sense. It would be semi-autonomous units helping humans, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So that brings us to Ben Gersell's vision of an AGI nanny that watches over all humans. The machines of loving grace, indeed, right? So is that a plausible scenario? Well, I think not. It's not a good idea to leave, to somehow transfer our most important functions to machines. So I agree with Ben that in critical functions there should always be people in the loop. Because otherwise the fully autonomous systems can evolve in ways that are appreciably not very beneficial to humans. I don't view the AI doomsaying scenarios as plausible, but still, simply because the machines weren't trained in the right way, or weren't given the right information, or simply weren't programmed correctly, they can make a lot of mistakes, and these can accumulate. These mistakes can accumulate, and as another speaker said, can result in the blockage of the society. It can bring the society to a standstill, or a catastrophe. Anything can happen, really. So the idea of police AIs supervising or enforcing the correctness of other AI units is plausible, but as a technological step, we first would need AI systems, AI units, agents, robots, whatever, that can understand human problems. And we are certainly not there yet. So we would have to begin with systems that don't understand these human problems. But eventually we'll get there. I get it, of course. Until we get there, we get at this technological level, of course, there will be many intermediate steps where machines might be able to engage in some meaningful interactions with humans, but not all.
And it's a very, very good problem to have, the one that we would describe in the Ben Goertzel kind of description of its as super intelligent network of oversight of human needs. You know, that's basically a system that can, if it becomes feasible, can sustain a universal longevity escape velocity that can sustain human welfare at a very, very high level indefinitely. Now, maybe it's a little bit of a fanciful notion, but you know, I've had conversations about this in a somewhat more earthbound context recently with Jason and with a number of other people in podcasts. So Paul Spiegel is kind of pretty knowledgeable of this. But you know, again, people are saying, "Are you always talking about Estonia?" But you know, like Estonia has this e-governance system in place. They have all manner of services and digitalization integrations throughout all facets of society, and as a result, and also by virtue of their small size and a relative lack of other special interests, kind of encroaching on what they're doing, they were able to begin to digitize their public health service, allowing for this kind of oversight of citizens in real time, allowing for a constant monitoring of health, allowing for prevention of disease rather than only focusing on end of life, basically, and spending those many trillions of dollars on that, keeping people healthy throughout. And I think that's a near-term reality. I think, you know, if we are approaching some AI takeoff, then that same internal logic can be applied to a lot of other facets of society. And I'm very hard-pressed to see a lot of downside for that. There's maybe some civil liberties issues that derive from it, but it's also something where people are living well and living a very long time at the same time. I don't know.
I forgot to say something.
Yep.
Certainly, robot laws of some sort, like Asimov's robot laws, can be implemented. Well, if you have an AGI system, it can certainly parse and understand logical rules, including laws, and just like a police, it can apply them. Of course, that's possible. It's just that we haven't been able to demonstrate that yet, but I'm sure we will in 20 years, 15 years, I don't know, but we will get there.
All right, so I want to wrap this up now so you all can go out and do whatever you guys do during whatever you're doing over there. But so starting with you, Daniel, thank you for coming on Detonation. I want to thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure. You have the floor to talk about anything we've talked about, the algocracy being the main theme. You're a constitutional lawyer. You can talk with civil society law. Is it a threat? Not a threat? Weapon systems. I mean, we've covered a bit, but thank you for coming on Detonation and take it away. It's been awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. No, it's been wonderful here. Thank you for having me. I don't have much to add. You know, there's so many issues, and we haven't even talked about a bunch of these issues. You know, what does it look like? You know, when you have if AI reaches a point where it can start to make policy decisions. You know, what does that look like? You know, what is that going to do to our society? I think there's a lot of fascinating aspects to go into. And again, thank you for having me on. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, there's definitely AI president. I was thinking about that. I was also thinking about it. The 3 laws of robotics, and there's some of the fallacies in there, but like they're pretty good. But you know, there's some issues with that. There's a lot to talk over. We'll probably have to have another debate. Also, bring on some different guests from different subject areas. Who who can mix in different specialities and things in there. Jason, thank you so much for coming on Detonation. This is your first time to Detonation, right?
Yes, it is.
Have you ever seen the show before?
I've watched 1.5 episodes in the past.
All right, well that's enough. So you're a fan then. That's good. But anyway, thank you for coming on Detonation. What would you like to say about this theme of algocracy, about the rise of the robot superpower?
I do have a policy that I think would be somewhat encompassing. That if you have a U.S. Constitution, you could pencil in at the bottom maybe, which is that every citizen would have the right to one equal share of the automated labor force, an equal vote for what it does or does not do, and a fair share of what it produces as a whole. That's mainly thinking towards the ability to have automation replace people at jobs, in regards to having AGI or other types of things that are administering our digital abilities and passive directions. That I'm not sure how that would necessarily apply, but maybe it's a conversation for a later date.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and hopefully you get to go out and watch some more episodes of Detonation. We'll like to have you on Detonation as well, and you, Daniel Hornal, as well, and Eray back, and everybody back. But we'll have you on, and we'll talk about this cool stuff, Jason. That'll be awesome. Eray, the algocracy. Your final comments, your final thoughts. You're going to be in charge, so you tell us what your plans are.
Hopefully I will not be in charge. My opinion is that nobody should be in charge of too much responsibility. I favor a direct democracy approach. So I believe the algocracy, or in general, state automation or governance automation functions should be merged with a direct democracy approach where citizens simply have more power. Because the politicians, they took a lot of power from us in all countries. And then the corporates did. So we have to take the power back. So I'd like to remind that.
So you see it as a democratization tool as well, in addition to all the other.
Yeah, well, I strongly believe in the benefits of more democratization than the opposite. Right.
All right. Thank you. Ben Zion, thanks for coming back on Detonation. Good to see you here, and thank you for organizing this as part of your campaign. What's your favorite thoughts on algocracy? And give us a quick update on your campaign strategy as well, because we know there's so much going on. You've got new people entering the race. Just a quick update on the news cycle on that as well. Thanks, Ben.
Yes. Well, it's incredible to get folks like this together and get some insights into this exciting prospect. However it unfolds and on whatever timeline it unfolds, I think it's a very good thing to be discussing. I'd certainly I'll take a few moments and talk about the campaign and some of these similar ideas in the Futurist New Deal relating to e-governance. But I was touched by what Jason said a moment ago about fundamentally a part of the Bill of Rights being that a new feature of the Bill of Rights being that we would have this kind of sharing in digitalization and automation being a part of the rights of every citizen. I think that is an incredibly important point, and one that I hope will be advanced by policymakers across this country in the coming years. This Buckminster Fuller's concept of ephemeralization, in many ways, it is a story of the 20th century. But it's a story that has been harnessed by monopolists. So we have our society able to do an awful lot more with an awful lot less in terms of productivity, but we don't see a commensurate elevation of the middle class. And that's something that we need to ensconce in law and in the spirit of our undertakings in the way that Jason has described. The Futurist New Deal has a similar considerations built into it. It's a basic income platform, and including these federal land dividend measures that would similarly being very much devised to help our middle class survive this jobless future, this period of years or decades where there's a lot of economic uncertainty in people's lives as a result of this move towards full automation. And the e-governance matters. I think everybody at this panel would be described as some kind of libertarian. Almost everybody I know in this community is some kind of libertarian, and I do believe very strongly that these e-governance initiatives are the shortest distance to a kind of fully voluntarist society, a society that is then able to do some of the other things that libertarians on other parts of the spectrum tend to obsess about with respect to the economy. But those people, I think they're shooting blanks because they're not trying to build actual initiatives towards to those ends. And I believe that moving our civilization towards e-governance and i-voting and digital democracy is the best way to do that.
All right.
What else would you like to discuss about the campaign?
Well, no, I just wondered if you had any new news, because this is your, but up to you.
Well, I sat down with Natasha Vitamore tonight, and we had a wonderful talk. I'll be posting that momentarily, but she's been a real friend to this campaign. She's had some kind words to say about the Ben Zion candidacy, and so I'm looking forward to sharing that with everyone. And our partners in Humanity Plus, our partners in the media, like Steele Archer, we have to value them and work with them. We're at a critical point in this the state of this party today, where we're not taking those relationships seriously, and some people this is their main campaign talking point, is undermining these kind of relationships generally, and that's not acceptable. Whatever pretext people might have that these people are somehow nefarious Illuminatis or elitists. These are people who've dedicated their lives to undertakings like advancing artificial intelligence, advancing life extension, and we can't have people who are effectively anti-transhumanists taking the reins of this kind of organization.
All right, thank you. Daniel, Jason, Eray, and Ben Zion. What I've learned is that you're talking about Bill of Rights, you're talking about democratization, you're talking about a whole bunch of things. I've learned that we're still at a fairly early stage in this, where there's still time to conceptualize, ethicize, and consider implications and actually implement change. But that time is diminishing. We are on a curve, and so, but there is still time. That's what I'm hearing from all across the board. So we look forward to seeing all of you back on Detonation very soon in whatever capacity, whether it's another group debate or individually as valued guests on the show. So thank you very much for coming on Detonation.
Yes, thanks for doing this, fellas.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for hosting us.
And if you're not a member, join up to the USTP ASAP. We need your support.
Yeah, do it soon. September 21st is the deadline for that, and we want to get as many people involved in this organization. We've talked about this number, a few of us. We want to get this organization to 10,000 members, and we can do that, I believe, by talking about these kind of exciting proposals and these prospects for the 21st century, getting people interested in the public health goals and other goals of this organization that are very different from what people in the two-party system tend to focus on. We have a proactive quality to this organization, and that kind of energy and excitement is catching And I think we can grow this organization in a real big way.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming on Detonation.
Thank you.